There's a 400-foot rocket in Texas that keeps blowing up. Not once, not twice, not even 3 times. As of April 2026, SpaceX has launched Starship 20 times, and at least half of those flights have ended in fireballs, debris fields, or rapid, unscheduled disassemblies. The engineering euphemism for "it blew up." The media calls it failure. The FAA calls it a problem. Congress calls it a waste. But Elon Musk calls it Tuesday. And here's the thing, he's not wrong. But he's also not telling you the whole truth. Because the real reason Starship keeps exploding isn't bad engineering. It isn't corner cutting. It isn't Elon Musk's ego or his Twitter fingers or his obsession with Mars. The real reason is much more terrifying and much more impressive than anyone wants to admit. Starship isn't failing. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do. The explosions aren't bugs, they're features. And if you don't understand why, you don't understand the future of spaceflight. This is the real reason Starship keeps exploding. Let's start with the obvious. Starship is the largest flying object ever built, not the largest rocket, the largest flying object. Period. Standing at 121 meters, nearly 400 feet, it's taller than the Saturn V. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty. If you laid it on its side in a football stadium, it would stretch from end zone to end zone with room to spare in both end zones. But height isn't the issue. Weight is, or rather the ratio of weight to power. Starship's fully stacked system, super heavy booster on bottom, Starship upper stage on top, weighs approximately 5,000 metric tons at liftoff. That's 5 million kilograms, 11 million pounds. The equivalent of roughly 1,100 fully loaded semi-trucks, all trying to leave Earth at once. To move that mountain, SpaceX uses 33 Raptor engines on the booster alone. 33. The Saturn V used 5. The Space Shuttle used 3 main engines plus 2 solid boosters. Even the Soviet N-1, the previous record holder for most engines, used 30, and it failed every single time it flew. 33 engines means 33 times the complexity, 33 times the vibration, 33 times the fuel lines, the turbo pumps, the sensors, the failure points. When SpaceX lights all 33 Raptors, they're not launching a rocket. They're conducting a controlled explosion so precise it makes a Swiss watch look like a sundial. And that's where the first explosions come from. The Raptor engine is a masterpiece. It's a full-flow staged combustion engine running on liquid methane and liquid oxygen, the first of its kind to ever fly. It's more efficient than anything NASA built during the shuttle era. It's reusable, theoretically capable of firing dozens of times with minimal refurbishment. But here's the catch. Full-flow staged combustion is basically an engineering nightmare dressed up as a propulsion system. In a traditional rocket engine, you have one turbo pump pushing fuel and oxidizer into the combustion chamber. In a staged combustion engine, some of that fuel is burned first in a pre-burner to drive the turbo pumps, then the exhaust is fed into the main chamber. In a full-flow staged combustion engine, both fuel and oxidizer go through separate pre-burners, meaning you have 2 complete combustion cycles happening simultaneously, feeding into one main chamber. It's like building 2 engines to power one engine. The efficiency gains are enormous. The complexity is insane. Each Raptor operates at 300 bar of chamber pressure. For context, your car's engine runs at about 10 bar. A jet engine might hit 40 bar. 300 bar is the pressure you'd feel 3 kilometers under the ocean, if the ocean were made of burning rocket fuel. Now multiply that by 33 engines firing in a grid pattern 10 meters across. The acoustic energy alone is enough to shake the booster apart. The vibration harmonics, frequencies where the engine's pulses align and amplify, can create standing waves that literally tear metal. During the first integrated flight test in April 2023, several Raptor engines failed to ignite or shut down early. The booster lost thrust symmetry, started to tumble, and SpaceX triggered the flight termination system. Explosive charges designed to destroy the vehicle if it deviates from its trajectory. The explosion wasn't a failure of design. It was a failure of scale. SpaceX had tested individual Raptors hundreds of times. They'd tested them in groups of 3. 9, even 20. But they'd never tested 33 firing simultaneously in a real flight environment with real aerodynamic loads, real fuel slosh, and real vibration. You can't simulate 33 engines. You have to fly them. And sometimes flying them means watching them blow up. Here's something the news coverage never explains properly. Most Starship explosions aren't accidental. They're intentional. Every Starship and Super Heavy booster is rigged with explosive charges. Flight Termination Systems, or FTS. If the vehicle deviates from its planned trajectory by even a few degrees, if it starts tumbling, if engines fail asymmetrically, if it threatens populated areas, the range safety officer presses a button and the rocket becomes a firework. This isn't SpaceX being reckless. This is SpaceX being responsible. The alternative to a controlled explosion is an uncontrolled one. A 5,000-ton rocket full of liquid oxygen and methane falling out of the sky and hitting something. During the second flight test in November 2023, all 33 booster engines worked. The stage separation happened. But then the upper stage's 6 engines ignited, and something went wrong with the liquid oxygen dump. The vehicle lost attitude control. Rather than let it tumble into the Gulf of Mexico unpredictably, SpaceX triggered the FTS. The fireball was spectacular. Social media went wild. Another SpaceX failure. But the mission objectives, testing stage separation, testing the upper stage in near vacuum, testing the heat shield, were partially achieved. The explosion was the backup plan working as designed. Think of it like this. When you test a new car, you don't just drive it around a track, you crash it into walls, you roll it down hills, you set it on fire. Destructive testing is how you learn what breaks. SpaceX is doing destructive testing with full-scale orbital rockets. The difference is that their crash tests happen in front of cameras, with the FAA watching, and with Congress asking why they're spending money on fireworks. Starship runs on liquid methane and liquid oxygen. They call it Methalox. NASA's SLS uses liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. The Saturn V used kerosene and liquid oxygen. Why methane? 3 reasons: Mars, reusability, and soot. Methane can be manufactured on Mars using the Sabatier reaction. Carbon dioxide from the Martian atmosphere, plus hydrogen from water, ice yields methane and water. If you're serious about Mars colonization, you need a fuel you can make there. Methane also burns cleaner than kerosene, leaving less soot and residue on the engines, which makes reusability easier. And it has better specific impulse than kerosene, meaning more thrust per pound of fuel. But methane has a problem that hydrogen doesn't. It's a cryogenic liquid that sits at minus 161 degrees Celsius. That's only 112 degrees above absolute zero. At that temperature, metal becomes brittle. Seals shrink. Gaskets leak. And if a leak happens near anything warm, you get a fire. Liquid hydrogen is colder still, 253 degrees, but it's so light that leaks dissipate upward quickly. Methane is heavier than air. It pools. It creeps into crevices. It finds ignition sources. During the third flight test in March 2024, Starship reached orbit for the first time, but during re-entry, the vehicle started tumbling and broke apart. The cause? Likely a methane leak in the engine bay that ignited during the high-G descent, or structural failure from uneven heating caused by the ship's belly flop maneuver. The belly flop is another Starship innovation that looks insane and is insane. Instead of re-entering nose first like the shuttle or base first like Apollo, Starship falls horizontally, using its flat belly as a heat shield while 4 massive flaps steer it. Then, at the last second, it flips vertical and fires its engines to land. It's aerodynamically unstable by design. The shuttle was a glider. Starship is a falling building that learns to fly at the last possible moment. And when you're falling at Mach 25 with cryogenic methane sloshing in tanks that weren't designed for horizontal flight, leaks happen. Fires happen. Explosions happen. Here's where SpaceX diverges from every rocket ever built. Starship's body isn't aluminum, it isn't carbon fiber, it isn't titanium. It's stainless steel, the same stuff your kitchen sink is made of, the same stuff they build bridges with, the same stuff that, when heated to 1,500 degrees, turns from solid metal to soft taffy. Why? Because Elon Musk did the math and realized that stainless steel gets stronger at cryogenic temperatures. At minus 196 degrees Celsius, the temperature of liquid nitrogen, 301 stainless steel's strength increases by about 50%. It's called the cryogenic effect, and it's why the body can be thin, cheap, and surprisingly robust when filled with super cold fuel. But the heat shield isn't separate. The shuttle had thousands of individual silica tiles glued to its aluminum skin. Starship uses a single-layer approach, the steel body itself coated with black heat-resistant tiles on one side, with cryogenic fuel flowing through the walls on the other. This is brilliant when it works. It's catastrophic when it doesn't. During re-entry, the windward side sees 1,500 degrees. The leeward side, shielded by the belly flop, might see 500 degrees. The fuel lines inside the walls see minus 161 degrees. That's a 2,000 degree temperature gradient across a few millimeters of steel. Metal expands when heated. It contracts when cooled. Do both simultaneously, and you get thermal stress. Cracks form, welds fail. And when a weld fails on a tank holding 1,000 tons of liquid oxygen and methane, the fourth flight test in June 2024 saw Starship survive re-entry but lose a flap during the descent. The fifth flight test in October 2024 achieved the first successful catch of the super heavy booster by the launch tower's mechanical arms, a feat that looked like science fiction. But the upper stage still had issues during re-entry. Each flight reveals new thermal failure modes. Each explosion teaches SpaceX where the steel gives up. Modern rockets don't fly on hydraulics and cables. They fly on software. Millions of lines of code control every aspect of Starship's flight, from engine gimbaling to flap movement to the flip maneuver that turns a horizontal falling building into a vertical landing rocket. The problem? No one has ever written software for a vehicle like this. The Space Shuttle had software, but it was a glider with wings. Falcon 9 has software, but it lands tail first with a single engine. Starship's software has to manage 33 engines during ascent, stage separation, 6 engines in vacuum, 4 flaps in hypersonic flight, the belly flop transition, the landing flip, and final descent. All while the vehicle is aerodynamically unstable and structurally stressed beyond anything previously tested. During the sixth flight test in November 2024, Starship achieved another successful booster catch. But the upper stage had issues with its flaps during re-entry, and the vehicle was lost. The software that controlled the flaps, adjusting them thousands of times per second to maintain stability, encountered conditions that weren't in the simulation database. You can't simulate hypersonic flight perfectly. The physics are too complex, the atmosphere is too variable, the vehicle is too new. So SpaceX flies, collects data, updates the software, and flies again. It's machine learning with explosives. Each explosion is a data point. Each fireball is a lesson in what the software didn't expect. And here's the terrifying part. It works. Starship's software gets better with every flight. The explosions become less catastrophic. The failures become more contained. By Flight 20, SpaceX is achieving things that seemed impossible on Flight 1. But the learning curve is paved with fire. Every Starship explosion triggers an FAA investigation. Every investigation grounds the fleet for weeks or months. Every delay costs SpaceX millions and pushes back their Mars timeline. The FAA's job is to protect the public. Starship launches from Boca Chica, Texas, a wildlife refuge on the Mexican border. The debris field from an explosion covers miles of sensitive habitat. The sonic booms from 33 Raptors can damage buildings 10 miles away. The launch pad itself has been cratered twice by the sheer force of the engines. So the FAA requires environmental impact statements. They require safety analyses. They require SpaceX to prove that the flight termination system works, that the debris won't hit populated areas, that the noise won't destroy protected species. SpaceX hates this. Elon Musk tweets about it constantly, but here's the reality. Without the FAA, Starship would be launching faster and exploding more and possibly killing people. The regulatory bottleneck isn't just bureaucracy, it's the friction between two incompatible philosophies. SpaceX's move fast and break things versus the government's move slow and don't kill anyone. Every explosion makes the FAA more cautious. Every FAA delay makes SpaceX more frustrated. And every frustrated tweet from Musk generates headlines that make the public think Starship is failing. But Starship isn't failing. It's just failing faster than the FAA is comfortable with. This is the part nobody wants to talk about. The real reason Starship keeps exploding is that Starship has to explode. Not because SpaceX is reckless, but because Mars is impossible. Let's be clear about what Mars requires. A vehicle that can launch from Earth, refuel in orbit, travel 225 million kilometers through radiation and microgravity, enter Mars' atmosphere at 20,000 miles per hour, land on a surface with 38% of Earth's gravity and a thin CO2 atmosphere, then either stay there forever or manufacture enough fuel to launch again. A vehicle that can do all this while carrying 100 people, their life support, their food, their shelter, and their sanity. A vehicle that can be built cheaply enough to launch thousands of times, because you need a fleet of these things to establish any kind of sustainable presence. No one has ever built this. No one has ever come close. NASA's plans involve smaller vehicles, slower timelines, and higher costs. SpaceX's plan involves building the biggest rocket in history and iterating through explosions until it works. The explosions aren't setbacks, they're tuition. Each one teaches SpaceX something about engine clustering, about thermal protection, about software control, about fuel management, about structural loads that no ground test can replicate. Apollo had 17 missions before the lunar landing. Mercury and Gemini were the explosions that didn't happen. Small, careful steps that taught NASA how to walk before running. SpaceX is trying to run a marathon while learning to walk, and every stumble is broadcast live. But they're covering ground faster than anyone else. Starship went from first integrated test to orbital flight in less than a year. From orbital flight to booster catch in 6 months. Each explosion is followed by a success that would have taken NASA years. Starship costs approximately $100 million per vehicle. That's expensive until you realize the space shuttle cost $2 billion per vehicle and could only fly 5 times. SLS costs $4 billion per launch and isn't reusable. SpaceX's entire strategy is based on economies of scale. Build Starships fast. Launch them often. Learn from failures. Eventually, the cost per launch drops to $10 million, then $2 million. Then, theoretically, the cost of fuel plus operations. But to get there, you need production lines. SpaceX is building Starships in a factory in Boca Chica at a rate of roughly 1 per month. They're not precious artifacts, they're prototypes, test articles, expendable learning tools. When a Starship explodes, SpaceX doesn't lose a $2 billion national asset. They lose a $100 million prototype and gain data worth billions in R&D savings. The economics of failure are completely different from NASA's model. NASA can't afford to explode SLS. There's only one SLS. It costs too much. It takes too long to build. The political consequences of failure are too severe. So NASA tests everything on the ground, simulates everything in computers, and hopes reality matches the models. SpaceX tests in reality. They build, fly, explode, build again. The explosion is the test. And because Starship is cheap enough to lose, they can afford to learn this way. The media doesn't understand this economics. They see a $100 million fireball and think waste. SpaceX sees a $100 million fireball and thinks bargain. There's a psychological element to Starship's explosions that SpaceX understands better than anyone. We love watching things blow up. The 2023 and 2024 Starship tests generated more live viewership than most space shuttle launches. The explosions went viral on Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Each fireball was memed, analyzed, celebrated, and condemned. This is free marketing. Every explosion reminds the world that SpaceX is trying something audacious. Every fireball generates headlines. Every failure sets up the narrative for the eventual success. When Starship finally lands on Mars, and it will eventually, the story won't be SpaceX built a rocket. It will be SpaceX kept exploding until they conquered Mars. The explosions become part of the legend. But there's a darker side. Public fatigue is real. The FAA's patience isn't infinite. Congress is already questioning why SpaceX gets so many chances while NASA plays it safe. Each explosion gives ammunition to critics who want to slow down commercial spaceflight. SpaceX is walking a tightrope. Too many explosions and the public turns. Too few explosions and they're not learning fast enough. The optimal explosion rate, yes, there's an optimal rate, is somewhere between spectacular failure and boring success. Let's step back and appreciate how insane rockets are. Starship is a building-sized machine that sits on top of an explosion, points itself at space, and hopes the explosion stays controlled for long enough to reach orbit. Every rocket is a barely controlled bomb. The only difference between a rocket and a missile is guidance software and intent. Starship's 33 Raptors are essentially 33 bombs firing in synchronized sequence, pushing against Earth's gravity with brute force. Physics doesn't care about Elon Musk's dreams. Gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared whether you're launching a paper airplane or a Mars rocket. The rocket equation, Tsiolkovsky's iron law, dictates that 90% of your rocket must be fuel. Only 10% can be structure and payload. To reach orbit, you have to burn fuel so fast that the thermal and mechanical stresses push materials to their absolute limits. Starship pushes past those limits. The Raptor's 300 bar chamber pressure is near the theoretical maximum for chemical rockets. The steel body is as thin as possible to save weight. The software operates at the edge of controllability. Every margin is razor thin. Every safety factor is minimized in pursuit of performance. And when you operate at the edge, sometimes you fall off. The explosions aren't surprising. What's surprising is that any rocket works at all. Here's a question. Why don't we see Blue Origin exploding? Why isn't ULA blowing up rockets weekly? Why is SpaceX the only company whose failures are front-page news? Because no one else is trying what SpaceX is trying. Blue Origin's New Glenn is smaller, more conservative, and hasn't flown yet. ULA's Vulcan uses proven engines and traditional construction. NASA's SLS is essentially space shuttle hardware rearranged. These are evolutionary designs, not revolutionary ones. SpaceX is the only company attempting full-flow staged combustion, stainless steel construction, 33 engine clusters, orbital refueling, and Mars landing in a single vehicle. Of course, they're the only ones exploding. They're the only ones pushing the boundaries far enough to fail. It's like asking why only Olympic gymnasts fall during routines. The answer: because only Olympic gymnasts attempt moves difficult enough to fall from. Every other rocket company is playing it safe. SpaceX is playing to win. And winning in this case means accepting losses that would bankrupt anyone else. Eventually, Starship will stop exploding. The software will mature, the engines will stabilize, the heat shield will work. The landing flip will become routine. When that happens, when Starship goes from experimental prototype to operational vehicle, everything changes. SpaceX will shift from testing to operations. The cadence will increase from monthly to weekly. The payloads will shift from steel ballast to Starlink satellites, then to lunar landers, then to crewed missions. The explosions will become statistical anomalies rather than expected outcomes. But that transition is dangerous. Complacency kills in rocketry. The Space Shuttle flew 24 successful missions before Challenger. It flew 88 before Columbia. Success bred confidence, and confidence bred oversight. SpaceX knows this. They've built their culture around the expectation of failure. Every successful landing is celebrated, but never taken for granted. The explosions are baked into their institutional memory. The question isn't whether Starship will eventually work. It's whether SpaceX can maintain their paranoid, failure-expecting culture once the explosions stop. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Eventually, people will ride Starship. NASA has already selected Starship as the lunar lander for Artemis 3. The first crewed Starship flight is planned for the late 2020s. And eventually, if the Mars vision holds, 100 people at a time will climb aboard this steel skyscraper and trust their lives to the lessons learned. From 24 explosions. Would you? The astronauts who flew the space shuttle knew its risks. They saw Challenger. They saw Columbia. They strapped in anyway because the mission mattered. Future Starship crews will know about the fireballs. They'll watch the footage of Flight 3 breaking apart over the Indian Ocean. They'll see the booster catches that worked and the ones that almost didn't. And they'll climb aboard anyway. Because here's the truth that Starship's explosions obscure. Every explosion makes the next flight safer. Not risk-free, never risk-free, but safer. The data from each failure feeds into the next design iteration. The software learns, the welds improve, the procedures evolve. By the time humans ride Starship, it will have flown more test missions than any crewed vehicle in history. The explosions will have taught SpaceX everything that ground testing couldn't. The crew will be riding a rocket that's already survived more punishment than any rocket before it. They'll just be the first humans to trust what the explosions proved. So why does Starship keep exploding? Because it's supposed to. Because it's the fastest, cheapest, most effective way to learn. Because physics is hard and Mars is harder. Because SpaceX chose to build the future through fire rather than caution. Every explosion is a data point. Every fireball is a lesson. Every rapid, unscheduled disassembly is another step toward making humanity multiplanetary. The media will keep calling it failure. The FAA will keep investigating. Congress will keep questioning. And Elon Musk will keep tweeting. But Starship isn't failing. It's iterating, it's learning, it's doing what no one else has the courage, the capital, or the culture to attempt. The explosions will continue. They'll get smaller, less frequent, more controlled, until one day a Starship will lift off, fly to orbit, refuel, travel to Mars, enter the atmosphere, land on the red dust, and the only fire will be the engines firing to slow its descent. And when that happens, we'll look back at the explosions and understand. They weren't failures. They were the price of the future. The real reason Starship keeps exploding is simple, because it's building something that has never existed before. And you don't build a future without breaking a few rockets along the way. Or 20.